So, who am I? I'm Des. I'm a writer, I'm an artist, an animal lover, a music buff. I have a ridiculous sense of humor. I love little more than to sit on my couch and run Netflix marathons. And I also think about suicide every day. I am a suicide attempt survivor. I've lost people to suicide. I've witnessed the immediate aftermath of a suicide of a stranger. I've seen it from more angles than I would care to. And that compelled me to dedicate my life to changing it. And in 2010, I started a series of portraits and true stories of suicide attempt survivors called Live Through This. So that was just an intro, and I want to tell you a little bit about my story and how that led me to this project. I began to experience depression for the first time when I was, come on slides, no? Okay, nothing's going to cooperate right now. There we go. I began to experience depression for the first time when I was 14. Transitioning from middle school to high school, it was an unexpected change for me. I'd been really excited about high school, and then I got there and I was like, oh, I'm not prepared for this. I was suddenly different from most of the kids around me. I was wearing black and listening to weird music. And my relationship with my parents went from really close to really adversarial. We were fighting all the time. My friends all started dating, and I couldn't figure out why I wasn't making those connections, and ended up starting to question my sexuality. I was desperately lonely, and I didn't know how to deal with that, with the transition, with this inability to connect. And so I started hurting myself to deal with that pain, to alleviate it. This is a picture of me in marching band. I'm on the right side. I had long hair. That's really weird. I went from good grades and heavy involvement in extracurricular activities to not sleeping at night, sleeping in class, suddenly failing everything. I did fail marching band one semester. I don't know how I did that. I was good at the instrument, so I was like, I don't know, was I walking backwards when I shouldn't have been? Not sure, still not sure. And when I was in 10th grade, my friend Brian took his own life. That's Brian on the right. And it sent me into this spiral of grief. I locked myself in my bedroom for a week, listened to a lot of Sarah McLachlan. We remember her from before the commercial, right? That commercial, that's when the remote comes out. And I would come out of my room after, several hours, and my grandmother would say, "Why do you care? Why do you care about this kid? He was so stupid and so selfish. He was an idiot." And I said, "My friend is never coming back." And it was kind of odd because my grandmother had lost friends to suicide. This wasn't foreign to her. And I don't remember her having quite that same response when her friend died. So what she didn't seem to understand was that I lost my friend who felt alone, and he was in pain, and he didn't know how to ask for help. He didn't feel he could. And what she didn't understand was that I felt alone and that I was in pain and I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't think I could ask for help because how could my problems compare to the problems I was seeing in the adults around me? I come from a working class family. We had a lot of struggle when I was growing up, so it was like, well, I can't compete with this, so I'll just be over here. And what she didn't understand, and what I never would have said, was that I saw myself in Brian. I was 15, and I was already having suicidal thoughts. And I didn't feel like I could reach out, and nobody was reaching out to me. And that includes not just my family, but my teachers, the people you expect to support you. Placeholder. So after I went to college, I suffered this terrible case of homesickness, which was really interesting to me because I left my hometown of Miami the day after I graduated high school. I could not get out fast enough. So I'm homesick and I'm freaking out. Then 9/11 happened, and what a way to enter into the adult world. It tore me apart. I had no connection to New York at the time, but But I thought the world was ending, and I was terrified, and bomb threats were being called into the school, and I didn't know what to do. I kept calling my parents, like, I don't know what to do. I want to come home. I want to come home. I was having nightmares. It was really bad. So I failed my first semester, and that was finally when they realized, maybe this isn't teenage angst. Maybe something is really wrong. Maybe we need to figure this out. So I went back. I went back home and saw my family doctor. I think he was the only person they knew to have me talk to. And he asked 3 questions. Do you sleep a lot? Are you gaining weight? Do you cry a lot? I was like, yeah, of course. I don't know. And of course I've gained weight. I'm a freshman in college. Come on. And I know he went there. He went to college. So it's like, you know about the freshman 15. And so he handed me this prescription for an antidepressant with no education, nothing. Just take this pill once a day and you'll be better. I had terrible side effects. And so I was bad at taking my meds, and I eventually stopped. It wasn't making my life any better. It took another year before I realized I needed to see a therapist. I came to that on my own. No one had thought to suggest it to me all that time. So I cycled through this process with several therapists. No one tells you therapy, like finding the right person, is kind of like dating. You have to find your person, and it's hard, and it takes a long time. You don't just walk into an office and you're not just cured right away. So fast forward to me, 20 years old. I had gotten into my dream school, and then I left because I fell in love, and I had to chase it. This was my first all-consuming kind of whirlwind love affair, and that beat out everything else. My girlfriend, Kat, was cute and smart and funny. We had all the things in common. We had everything in common, including our coping mechanisms, which were not awesome. That's how I'm going to describe them, not awesome. I moved to Tennessee to be with her. I promised myself I was just taking a year off from school and I would go back, but I never went back. I stayed for the story. I stayed for love, I stayed for the adventure, but what I got, the story that I got, was not the one that I expected. And I love Tennessee. I love the mountains. I'm from Miami, so we don't do seasons. Like in December, the Uggs come out and it's 60 degrees. And you're like, you're not actually cold. You're just not. So I loved seeing seasons for the first time, and I felt this constant sense of awe. But I had no friends. I didn't like Kat's friends. We didn't jive, and she was all I had, so I clung to her, and it began this long, painful cycle of codependence that was really hard to break. I worried constantly about bills, how and when I would see my family next, because I'd never been so far away from them, and I just miss them, And at that point, do we have Bennigan's here? Is that a thing? Do we know what Bennigan's is? It's a gastropub. That's the word for those now, right? It was an Irish pub. So I'm working 14-hour days at Bennigan's as a server, 5 or 6 days a week. I had very little downtime. And that's when I discovered my best friend panic attacks for the first time. So I'd have my tray of drinks, and I'd be dropping drinks off at tables, can't breathe, tears running down my face. Okay, so for those of you who know Bennigan's has this amazing potato soup. I like food, guys. They had this amazing potato soup, and I loved it growing up. And my boss, when I was having these panic attacks, she would sit me down at a table, and she would give me potato soup and a glass of seltzer water, and she'd be like, "This is gonna make you better." And I was like, I'm skeptical. And it didn't make me better. It didn't quell my panic. But she didn't have the staff to let me go mid-shift, so even though it felt really insensitive at the time, I guess that was just what she could do. But important fact, I don't eat potato soup anymore. And I didn't want to get stuck in the holding pattern that I was seeing in the people around me at that point. And I'd been there for about a year in Tennessee, and so I established residency, and I said, I'm going back to school. It's not my dream school, but it's here. And I'm going to finish what I started. I'm going to get this degree. So I'm not going to look at potato soup anymore. So between Brian's suicide, my own emotional difficulties as a teenager, I knew what I wanted to do as an adult. I knew at 16 that suicide was going to be my thing. So I studied psychology as an undergrad. I wanted to help other kids who were like me, who had no one to talk to. I wanted to become the one to talk to. And I wanted to do research too. I wanted to know what drives people to want to die, and how we can prevent it. I was told over and over again as an undergrad, you can't do this stuff yet. You have to wait till grad school. We can't talk about suicide. You can't write your research papers about suicide. Just stop and go to grad school. Except for my senior year. I went to 5 undergraduate institutions before I finally did the thing. So I heard no a lot from these people, my faculty members, except for Dr. Dula, my senior year. And he encouraged me to study whatever it was that I wanted to study. He had a lab. He let me be his research assistant. And he said, suicide's fine. As long as you have the motivation, go forth and be awesome. And so I did. I volunteered in his lab, and I volunteered briefly at the local crisis center. I got assist trained. That was really the first time I had any kind of crisis intervention training. There was a certain amount that was intuitive that I knew from my own experiences, but it was really helpful to have that training. And during training, I shared openly about my cutting for the first time to a room full of people because I trusted them and we had similar goals. And I knew even then that putting a familiar face to something really difficult might help them empathize better with something they just don't understand. So, at almost exactly the same time, about a year into my relationship with Kat, 2 things happened. This is a few years after seeing my first therapist. I finally find this incredible therapist. I mean, she was a genius. She asked all the right questions and really led me down a path to insight that I just would not have had without her. And I also experienced my first hypomania, which led to a diagnosis of bipolar disorder at 21, which now, funny fact, my psychiatrist and my therapist do not believe that that diagnosis was correct at 35, so that's fun. But we continued this process of adding and subtracting medications to try and find the right balance. And we did that for 2 years, and it was really, really difficult. The other thing that happened is that for the first time during an argument with my girlfriend, she threatened to use more than her words to hurt me. I left the house and I called my best friend, inconveniently for my storytelling purposes, also named Kat. I saw her yesterday. It was fantastic. So I called her. I left the house. I called her. We talked about it. And I went back. I still went back. I didn't know what to do. And so if we've read textbooks about interpersonal violence, all of this unfolded as it would in those textbooks. I was isolated from my friends. I was accused of cheating. I was told I was crazy and worthless. And so I turned inward and I took all of that pain, all of that anger out on myself. I continued to hurt myself because it was the best way that I knew how to cope at that point. Then the threats turned into shoving, turned into hitting me in places that were not visible under my clothing, turned into literally being knocked out by my person and getting a black eye. And then one day I fought back, and I kept fighting back, but I never left. And our fights were so terrible that I bought a car so that I could escape them. I bought a car, but I didn't leave. And I could escape and I could come back when things were calmer, instead of locking myself in the bathroom and hurting myself, or having my things destroyed, or hurting my person and having her hurt me back. Because fighting back, even if it was retaliatory, it was and is soul-crushing in a way that I still can't describe. Of all the things I've been through, that's the hardest, because it shook me to my core. It made me question everything about who I thought I was. And so with that, then my car became a weapon. I spent 2 years fantasizing about how I could use it to end my life. 3 years into our relationship, I found out she's cheating on me. And I fell apart. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. I was able to go to work and maintain my social life because I was hiding. I was trying to hide how much I was struggling. I finally got accepted to a PhD program in Miami, so I'm trying to plan for this trip home across the country, and I'm trying to do it without betraying the fact that I was suicidal. So this is probably the most vulnerable I'll get tonight. This is a page from my journal at the time. I'd come home from work and I'd sit on the porch and I would cry and I'd write, do for yourself, do for yourself, do for yourself, over and over, as like a mantra. I was trying to make myself go. I was trying to find the strength. Because I was allowing someone to abuse me, to lie to me, to cheat on me. And I was taking it, but I didn't know how to leave. So I tried to will myself out of existence, out of this resilient body that I inhabit, sometimes frustratingly resilient. I thought about my car, and I thought about the trains behind my house, and I thought about all of these different ways that I could make the pain stop. I just wanted the pain to stop. Whenever I find myself in intense emotional pain, a pressure settles right here, and it makes me feel trapped. And back then, again, hurting myself was the only way that I knew how to make this stop. It made what was up here, I could see it. If I could see it, then it meant that I wasn't crazy. It wasn't all in my head. I wasn't making it up. It made it tangible, and it made the pressure fade enough to get through the next moments. It made the panic lessen. In its own way, it was incredibly helpful. The scary thing about self-injury is that it works. And that's what makes it such a hard habit to break. It's about controlling emotions that feel uncontrollable. And I also knew what kind of damage it could do if I lost control. And at that point in my life, I really, really, really wanted to lose control. Because again, I needed to find a way to make the pain stop. And on June 27th, 2006, after being acutely suicidal for 2 years, I did lose control. I was 23 years old. That's me and my friend Becky just a couple days before. So I'd spent 3 weeks at this point, breaking up, getting back together with Kat in this terrible cycle. We were so deeply intertwined. We lived together, worked together, went to school together, shared a bank account, had all the same friends. Our codependence issues just weren't allowing us to sever ties. And walking away didn't feel like an option. I naively thought that loving her was enough. I don't know, maybe I listened to too much of the Beatles when I was, I don't know. Love is not all you need. They were wrong. So on this day, we had this terrible argument. She packed a bag and she left without telling me where she was going. All I knew was that she was going there with the person that she'd been cheating on me with. So I tried to use the few healthy coping skills I had. I watched TV. I watched Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. I listened to music, listened to Tori Amos. I talked to my friends online, the friends that we weren't entangled together with. But nothing was doing what I needed it to do. So I kept calling her. I called over and over again because I did have that ambivalence, that tie to life, even though I wasn't sure if I wanted to stay or if I felt like I wanted to go. But I had that tie. But even if I were able to get in touch with her, I didn't think I could live with her anymore. So it was this very uncomfortable thing. Our love was too painful, and every possible future I might have, including that PhD, I did have a future, a good one, that I worked hard for. All of that went dark. I felt like there was nothing else I could do. There were no other options. So then I found myself in my living room trying to die. I called one more time. She picked up. And when I asked her to come home, she hung up on me. She called back a few minutes later, and this time she stayed on the phone, and I didn't know why she chose to stay on the phone at that point until the banging started happening on my front door. And suddenly there are police and paramedics in my very small apartment, and they seem that big, and I felt that big. I was so hysterical, I couldn't tell them my name, so I pulled out my little flip phone and I just dialed my mom's number, and when she picked up, I said, "Mom, the cops are here." And I handed the phone over. So she gave them my information, and when they put her back on the phone with me, she said, "You're going to the hospital. You don't have a choice about that. You do have one decision that you can make, and that's whether you're going to go willingly. If you fight them, they're going to handcuff you." And I just said, "I'm good. I've had enough trauma for the evening. I thought at that point I had enough. So I said, I will go with you. They wouldn't let me put on a bra. At that point, I had very large boobs. You didn't think you were going to get boob jokes tonight, did you? And I couldn't put on a bra, and so I'm wearing these terrible ratty pajamas, and I'm like this, and it just felt so humiliating. Like the one thing, like let me have something, and they wouldn't. So they threw me in the ambulance, and no one was talking to me. It was very quiet. And the next thing I remember is being in this hospital room. It was cold and it was beige, and like they are. They're all the same, right? And I was alone, and I don't know how much time passed. It felt like a long time. I had little cell reception. We weren't really doing the texting thing. The texts were still 25 cents each. And so I had time to sit and think about what I had done and the consequences of that and this intense, incredible fear that I was feeling about what's going to happen, what are they going to do to me, am I going to get locked up? Because one of the things my mom said to me when we talked was, you want to be a psychologist. You need to get out of there. You don't want this on your record. This record, I don't know. Now that I'm an adult, I know better. No one has administrative skills like that. But I was scared, and so I was like, oh God, what have I done, But that experience, counterintuitively, of trying to die made me realize how much I wanted to live and how much value I thought I had with my life. And I knew that if I didn't find some way to change everything, that I probably would die by my own hand. So I said, I made a promise to myself. I'm going to stop hurting myself, no matter what that requires. And then the nurse showed up. The nicest thing I could say was that she was not nice. That's about as diplomatic as I can be. I told her I was terrified of needles. Guys, tattoos are different. Tattoo needles are different from syringes. Syringes are terrifying. I said, I'm afraid of needles. Can you just be gentle? Something. And so her response to that was, I was laying down, and her response to that was to fill the vials with my blood and lay them on my stomach and line them up one by one. Pretty sure that's not protocol. I mean, I've had a lot of needles since then, and no one's ever done that to me. So it felt like this punishment. And that was the most warmth I felt in that room that night. So she left, and then the staff psychologist came in and did a suicide assessment, and I lied because I was listening to my mom, but I also didn't feel safe where I was. I didn't have a reason to feel safe that night. So I told her, I was like, I'm not suicidal, I had a bad night. And they were like, well, all right, you can be free now. My friend Allison came and picked me up, and the only condition that they gave her was that she stay the night with me. So, like I said, I didn't feel safe. Let me give you proof. These are my discharge papers, a description of depression, come on, short one no less, and a description of abrasions. And then the important part is right here. Follow up in 24 hours. Have you guys tried this number, 00000000000? It works, I'm sure. So there was nothing telling me that I was going to get the help I needed. And so I was like, I know that I'm safe elsewhere with my people. So we walked out into the parking lot, me and Allison, where everything looked completely normal and unchanged, and my life resumed, just as if it was any other evening. I knew that I was on the other side of one of the most profound experiences I would have in my life. And it was so normal that we stopped at Taco Bell. I still like tacos. So we get back to Allison's place, and she takes me upstairs to her bedroom. She was having a raging party that night, so I'm upstairs, and it's like... But she puts on the Sleepy Time playlist, and the song Fever Dream came on by Iron and Wine. I always want to put it in here, and then I keep forgetting. And I'd never heard it before. It's this really soft, beautiful song. I still think of the night I tried to kill myself whenever I hear the song, and I hear it often. But it's not with a sense of fear or shame about what happened that night, but with a feeling of comfort and love because I felt safe for the first time in a long time. So the next day I call my best friend Kat, And I said, here's what happened. And we decided the best thing was for me to just leave my life. But I had no money again. I was tied up. My money was tied up with my girlfriends. And so she wired me enough money. She had a house in Texas at 23. She owned a house. Did anybody own a house at 23? I just bought a house at 35. Like, what is that? A very responsible human being. But she had this place for me. And she said, come stay as long as you need to. And so I finished out the week at my job. I was trying to be as responsible as I could. I packed my stuff, and I tried to ignore the stares and whispers of everyone around me because, again, I lived in a very small town. The day I left, I meant to leave early, but the hours kept passing, and I was scared, and I didn't know how to say goodbye. So at 5 o'clock, I put the rest of my things in my car. I kissed her one last time, and I remember I can hear the door slamming behind me as I ran out of the house. I have like two oral memories, and that's one of them. I didn't get out of my car again until 16 hours later when I pulled into Kat's driveway in Denton, Texas, and I took a nap, and I started my life again in the care of my best friend. That's Kat when we were babies. I spent a month in Texas healing from my attempt, and I did move home to Miami for grad school 2 months after my suicide attempt. And so I get there, I'm excited, I'm going to do suicide research finally. But in this unfortunate sequence of events, it turned out that I didn't actually have faculty support for that. I think suicide was just too taboo for them, and they weren't having it, so I felt lost. I'd done exactly what I'd been told to do for years, and there I was, with nothing. So I left. I wasn't going to spend years and thousands of dollars, yay, loans, getting this education that wasn't going to help me achieve my goals. So in the middle of all of this happening, I lost one of my best friends to suicide. I did what I say I did what any confused directionless 20-something would do, but I don't know that anyone would do that. I ran away to New York with $1,000 in my pocket. That'll get you through approximately one day in New York. That's maybe 1 month's rent if you're lucky. I didn't know what I was doing. So I ran away to the circus, and I set my passion for suicide prevention aside. I was lonely in my city, as in Tennessee. I had no friends. Deeply depressed, grieving my breakup, healing from my attempt, grieving my dead friend, and the future that I felt had been taken from me. And then my dad died unexpectedly in prison. It was just a really hard time, and I was alone in a way that I hadn't been. The one thing that helped me was my love for photography. It was a hobby at that point. And when I was in grad school, with the loan money, I bought a camera, I bought furniture, I bought all the things. An iPod. But this camera, I carried it around with me everywhere I went. It was just the thing that kept me tethered, It was all I had. So I started going to concerts several nights a week, and I always took my camera. And I'd gotten a job at a record label, and that made it very easy for me to go to concerts and photograph them. And I really learned about photography by photographing musicians. I'm sure most of you have been to concerts. The lights are constantly changing. People are moving. It's kind of dark. You have to kind of learn an intuition with the machine you're working and have a little bit of a symbiosis with it. So that's how I learned. I got to photograph and eventually interview many of my heroes. Tori Amos, again, I love her. You guys might know Sting, Crystal Castles. Also one of my heroes, Charlotte Martin. Jay-Z, the next frame that came after this, he's waving at me as the bodyguards are pushing me out of the photo pit. And then Jenny Lewis and Karen O. The picture of Karen O on the right side, just kind of store that one. I'll come back to it for a second in a bit. And Amanda Palmer. I've always been into music. I'm such a huge fan. My mom had me when she was very young, and she loves music. We grew up together listening to music. That was the way we bonded. So these were experiences I'd wanted to have all my life. But something was missing. I photographed bands for about 3 years before I figured out, what's going on here? Why doesn't this feel fulfilling to me? I wanted to be doing something good, and this was cool, but I wanted to change the world, and I didn't think leaving behind a body of work of musicians was going to do that, and that may have been wrong, but I needed to change focus. So I started looking for this personal project. And of course, because my goal for so many years had been to help people who were dealing with suicide, I immediately returned to that, and I realized, well, maybe I can use my camera to achieve whatever it was that I didn't achieve in academia. I wanted to find out what happened to the other people like me who lived, who were they, where were they, and what happened next. So I took the skills I spent those 3 years learning, how to interview a person and how to capture their essence in a single frame or in a limited amount of frames. And I set out to shine a light on these people whose voices deserve to be heard. I called the project Live Through This because that's what we did and it's what we continue to do. Back then, when I was starting this whole thing, we were a largely silent, anonymous group. We were reduced to statistics. Here are some beautiful statistics. You may see one more after these. I won't bore you. We were reduced to numbers. We were stripped of our humanity, our names, our faces, our hobbies, our quirks, all gone. We're just attempting suicide 3 times as often as men, as a woman. Instead of being people, we're blips on scatter plots or checked boxes on surveys. We weren't teachers, Ivy League students, soldiers, artists. We certainly were not moms. Also a mom and an amazing advocate. Trans poet activists, writers, rock stars. This guy, David Pajo, that picture of Karen O, that day that I took it in 2009, he was on stage with her, and I didn't know it at the time. He just happened to be filling in that night for somebody. And so it was this really beautiful full circle moment that kind of felt serendipitous, like I was meant to meet you. We just didn't exist. So something's missing. I hate it when this happens. All right, so because of that, because I felt like we didn't exist, I didn't know how to find anybody. I didn't know how to find these people, even though I had this goal. And so I started with celebrities. These are all famous people who have attempted suicide and lived. I keep a list. We have weird hobbies here. The media covers everything they do. If it bleeds, it leads. I keep losing myself. Hold on. I had the PR contacts, so I'm reaching out to these people, but I had no body of work. And so, I'm like, hey, can you be a part of this? Can you tell your story? And they're like, no, who are you? What's wrong with you? Elton John told me he was busy. I don't know. So I decided that was a little too ambitious, and I changed direction. And I decided I gotta find the average person. And of course, I found out later that research bears that out. Regular people who have these experiences, if their community is exposed to them, the community is more likely to change their opinions about mental health and suicide. So that was really interesting. So I posted to Craigslist, because why not? Craigslist is very active in New York. I don't know how it is here. And the ad was like, suicide attempt survivors wanted for educational portrait project. And I would put it up, and Craigslist would flag it because of the word suicide and take it down. And then I would put it up because I'm nothing if not persistent. And so eventually, I got a couple of people that way. And the more I talked about it over time, the more friends would pull me aside and say, hey, I have this story to tell you. Friends, again, I had no idea. I didn't know I knew anyone who had been there, but we were all so quiet. So that's what we do. I have attempt survivors tell me their stories. I give them a neutral platform to say whatever it is they need to say about their experiences with suicide, what led up to their attempt, what it feels like to be suicidal, what happened after, how they continue to struggle. The prompt I give them is tell me your name, how old you are, what you do, define that however you want, and your story as you see fit to tell it. And I make sure that they know Don't tell me things you don't want the internet to know. Don't tell me something you're not comfortable sharing. And I listen and I hold space. Because many of these people are telling their stories for the first time, and they're telling them to a stranger. All they know about me when we sit down together is that I have also been there, and that I'm probably not going to judge. I don't think any of this seems particularly groundbreaking or special, but you have to realize that for so many of us, like if you haven't had this experience, I know many of the people in this room have, being able to talk about it at all is a really new thing. We spent years in this shame closet, as I call it. We're told to set it down, let it go, buck up. We're told we're selfish and weak and lazy, and that we have so much to live for. But being able to acknowledge that and to own it and not to have to feel ashamed of it takes some of the weight off. So I can talk about this process all day, but I think the best way for you to feel it is to go into one of the rooms with me. That usually takes about 2 hours, the interview process. After that is the part that people seem to find the hardest, that's when I make the portrait. It's not telling the story. They're like, oh God, you've got the camera out. I feel that. So I take them somewhere outdoors, and again, the prompt is as simple as the story part. Look into my lens. Do whatever you want with your face. Just look at me. What you see is what they were feeling on one day in their life. It's a time capsule or a reminder that they chose to continue living on that day, despite their struggles. It prompts the viewer to do something too, which is to look into their eyes. You'll notice when you look at the portraits that the eyes are really the main focal point, because we've always looked away from suicide and the people who it affects. I take them outside for a reason too. This is Nicole. She is the first person I ever interviewed and the first portrait I made for the project. She's really intense. She's on this black seamless background. Everything's lit. I really wanted to do a studio project for this, or a studio portraits for this one. But I was looking at it and I realized putting them on black seemed a little dark. Yeah, maybe a little morbid. And my goal here is not to shock or sensationalize. We don't need more moody narratives of the darkness of suicide. That's not what this is about. This work is about life and how struggles with suicidal despair are a part of life. How waking up and choosing to stay and struggling through another day, despite adversity, is a triumph. And it's resilience. It's not weakness. So from that day on, I took people outside, outdoors, in natural light, into the world that they tried to take themselves out of. I think that's really meaningful. The other thing is I don't screen people for the project. I'm not looking for the wildest story. If they're willing to sit down with me, I'm willing to sit down with them. The only rules I have are that they have to be over 18. They have to be willing to use their full name and likeness. What else? They have to be a year out from their most recent suicide attempt, just so there's a little time to process what they've been through and be ready to talk about it. It's not easy. And then they have to be cool with it going on the website and having anybody be able to access it anywhere at any time. I started the project because I felt alone and because I wanted to stop feeling alone and because I didn't want others to feel alone. So every story that I hear, every photograph I make eventually makes its way very slowly to the website. When you type in the URL, livethroughthis.org, you're kind of presented with this giant grid. I made the screen smaller when I took this screenshot to give you a sense of the volume. But you're presented with this grid of people who are different in so many ways, but who are all connected by their experiences with suicide and what happened after. Live Through This is the only project in existence where these stories are not only displayed in such large volume, but not a single one of them is anonymous or hidden away in shadow. There are no silhouettes, My last statistics. So this is the research of a friend of mine, Dr. Julie Searle. I just think it's really interesting, and actually the clicker business that we saw earlier, it was exactly this. It was really, really cool to see that. I tried to take a screenshot, I wasn't fast enough. But the survivorship is a continuum rather than I survived or I didn't survive the loss of someone I know. 135 people are exposed to every suicide death. So that's from bystanders, first responders, family, friends, professionals, cleaners. 48% of people know somebody who died by suicide. And then when you ask about attempts, 60% of people know. So that's every other person in any given room that you might be standing in. And yet, the voices of people with lived experience have gone ignored for so long. I find that really just shocking. Still, I find this shocking. Our stories are important. I tell my story about my mental health struggles not because I love public speaking. I'm actually really afraid of you. But I want people to feel okay to share their own. And if I can stand up here and help that to happen and facilitate that, then I will do it. By speaking up, showing up, making ourselves known, we give each other and everyone else permission to talk about this really scary thing. Our stories give us power over traumas we've lived through. They help us work through that. Over stereotypes people heap on us. They give us power to make change. I think that's what this Ask the Question project is really doing. And they can inform our recovery, how our providers can better serve us. They can shape mental health policy, crisis training for first responders, medical professionals. They can save lives because stories are a life raft, and they can be a pardon in the 11th hour. And the thing about suicide and what you're seeing here, you like my subversive pin that I included as my last slide? What we're seeing here is that suicide doesn't discriminate. It's not an affliction of the other. It can happen to anybody, and I think in raising our voices to honor that, we can maybe put a dent in the suicide rate instead of continuing to watch it rise. In 2013, I did this thing. Do we know what Kickstarter is, everybody? So for those of us who don't, Kickstarter is a crowdfunding platform that allows you to say, I want to do this thing, here's how much money I need to do it. You can give me as little as $1 or as much as 1 million or whatever. I don't know, I'm making stuff up. Give me whatever you can. And if I make this goal, for me it was $15,538, then I can do this thing. If I get $15,537, I cannot do this thing. It's all or nothing. I wanted to take the project on the road. I wanted to go across the country and see what people had to say. Were there regional differences? What's going on? At that point, I had collected 15 stories of New Yorkers. I just wanted to collect as many different kinds of stories as possible to show this depth and breadth of these emotional experiences. People of all ethnicities, ages, gender presentations, etc. I think that's finally coming through now that I've interviewed as many people as I have. So in 30 days, $23,000. I was so shocked. I spent 2 years conceiving of this Kickstarter project because I thought, no one's gonna want me to do this. No one's gonna help. And I was really blown away. I'm still blown away by that. When I started the project, I couldn't articulate exactly what it was that I was looking for. I just knew I needed to speak up. I didn't want to be invisible anymore about my suicide attempt or about my experiences with domestic violence, especially because I'm gay, and growing up I saw domestic violence happening around me. But I thought, well, I'm immune. Gay people don't do that. Little did I know. And it turns out that I was looking for a community. I needed to know there were people out there who understood, and clearly there are. I've interviewed and photographed 186 attempt survivors in 36 cities across the country, from Alaska to Florida. Most places in between. The middle of the country is more of a blank spot than I would like it to be, but I'm still working on that. Their ages range from 19 to 69. They come from all walks of life. Interesting, too, is the fact that we're not just talking about suicide. So many other things come up. Suicide is just an entry point. Rape, postpartum depression, we've talked about murder, childhood sexual abuse, just things we don't talk about openly. I also asked 2 questions of everyone involved in the project. The first is suicide still an option for you? What I noticed when I was doing my research before I started the project was that of the few stories that were available at that point, they all followed a formula. Terrible things happened, there was a suicide attempt, they got help, everything was magic and amazing, and they were cured forever. That didn't feel real to me. It wasn't true to my experience, and I had an inkling that it might be similar for others. And I think the answer to that question is really valuable to the people who can help us. The answer that almost every single person has given me is yes, it's an option, but no, I don't want it to be. And I think that's more of an honest picture of this experience. It comes and it goes, and you find ways to cope, hopefully. To me, that's more hopeful and more real than the story with a happy ending, because the story with a happy ending is really just a middle. The other question that I ask is, what good things have come from your experiences with suicide? Because we don't talk about that enough. We don't talk about how we grow from these terrible things that happen to us. We only talk about the negative aspects of suicide, which, yeah, we should talk about that. Again, the answer is it's universal. My experiences with suicide allow me to better understand people like me and subsequently to better help them. I love that. I love it. By the end of every interview, I've made a new friend. We're laughing. It's not this dark, terrible thing. I gained the community I was looking for. I gained another family. And eventually I took it a step further and connected them all, because I had them, but they didn't have each other. So I started this secret Facebook group, and I said, okay, everybody get in here. If you want to talk to each other and be friends, then do that. And they have, and I've seen them support each other over the past several years, and it's this just really incredible thing to watch. Because these people are my family, they stick with me. Sorry, this is the hard part. I'm still in contact with 95% of them. I see their ups and downs, their triumphs, their struggles. We entertain each other, we lift each other up, we write emails, and we make plans to see each other again. I interviewed Natalie in Eugene in 2014. We had this immediate connection, and I knew that I wanted this person in my life. We made plans to have drinks and smoke cigars the next time I visited. She became a really vocal advocate for suicide prevention in her community. I couldn't find the picture today. I know I have it somewhere, but she even told her story on the front page of the Register Guard in Eugene. And we lost Natalie in the summer of 2016. That doesn't make her life or her advocacy a failure, or any less of a gift. She woke up every day for over 50 years, and she chose to stay. And she gave me a gift, too, outside of the gift of knowing her at all. I knew that someday, because of the nature of this work, we're at higher risk for suicide. I knew that someday I would lose somebody. And I thought that when that day came, I would have to stop. But the gift that she gave me was that she made sure I knew these stories needed to be shared. And she let me know that. So the opposite happened. After her death, I felt more resolved to make sure that our voices were heard. We also lost Bob Rees earlier this year. And so the project goes on in their memory, because they were really incredible people. Live Through This grew from this idea into this body of work that I intended, but then into something so much bigger that I could never have hoped for. So it exists as this art-based work that I wanted to do. But then things like this happen, and who wakes up and thinks, I want to be in the New York Times one day? I certainly didn't. It was amazing to see people care about the mission in the Kickstarter and the media. I get to do amazing things. I do presentations, on interesting things about suicide. Like I did this one last year at South by Southwest. We talked about suicide in video games and how that affects the people who play them, how it's portrayed in the games. You get to talk about how we tell our stories and how we can tell them more safely, how we can tell them in a meaningful way. I work with national organizations on their responses to suicide and current events. I work a lot with the American Association of Suicidology. It's a mouthful. I noticed they weren't really responding to deaths in the media or whatever. They weren't doing anything. Sometimes you'd get a press release that was like, suicide's a problem. Okay. And so we started this media task force, and so when Chris Cornell died, it was, okay, suicide's a problem, but also men, middle-aged and above, are at higher risk for suicide. Here's how you can support them, here are resources. So we kind of were using these terrible things that happen as teachable moments. I'm teaching reporters and creatives how to better tell the stories. An example of that is, do we know about Dear Evan Hansen? It won a couple of awards, like 5, 7 Tonys last year, something. I consulted with Mike Feist, the guy on the left in the picture on the right. He played Connor, a character who dies by suicide in the play. He wanted to know, how can I best portray somebody who's having these struggles? And that was really cool, you know, to see it just being used in ways that aren't obvious. Live Through This is being used as a training tool in graduate programs. You know, it's helping train our future clinicians. It's being used in crisis centers. So it often, no, I'm going to skip that part. I'm not going to talk smack today. But Live Through This is changing things, and it's really cool to watch. And then the most magical full circle thing that's happened, I get to do research. This is just a sample slide. I partnered with researchers on the University of Kentucky and University of Louisville on a qualitative research program based on the narratives that I've collected. So it's about attempt survivors, but it's also driven by attempt survivors. Our research team has attempt survivors at every level. We're asking the questions. We're making sure that the questions are ethical, you know, that we don't feel like monkeys being studied. And then we're also doing the coding, we're doing the writing, we're a part of it. We've got this one. This one is on meaning making. You know, how do you process the story of your attempts? We've got some on post-traumatic growth based on bereavement research. And then one that just got published is intersectional identities of attempt survivors who are also gender and sexual minorities, which is really cool. So, cool things happened. It was good. In 2012, I fell accidentally, madly in love with my wife, the person who would teach me what a healthy relationship looks like after many really awful relationships. She's funny and smart and kind, and she works with me every day to keep our relationship healthy. When I met her, I was in the middle of a divorce. So on top of my suicide prevention work, if you Google me, you will find out that I was one of the first gay people married in New York and one of the first gay people divorced in New York. That was a good time. So I'm in the middle of this terrible divorce, and I'm stalling on the project. I was paralyzed with fear, you know, of what friends, family, professionals were going to think of this thing that I was doing. And I was also really invested in having fun at that point. She sat me down and she was like, hey, are you ever not fun? I mean, that's not a bad thing to think. But she was like, what are you doing? You know? And so whenever I needed encouragement to go forth, she said, you can do this. And I needed to hear that a lot. And she didn't mind telling me. Like I said, now we're married. It's good. She gave birth to our magical son in January. That's us. That's us on adoption day. Yes, I had to adopt my own child. That's a different talk. And the last thing, I'm busy cooking our second right now, after a year of struggles with infertility and 2 miscarriages. So good things are happening. I'm going to read today. Thank you. I just spent an hour telling you about the hardest parts of my life, and the best ones. I can say now that I have this beautiful, fulfilling life. And it's good, and I'm glad that I decided it was worth sticking around for. I wish I could say that I was cured of my depression, the self-injury, the suicidal thoughts, but I'm not. I've had suicidal crises since my attempt. I still struggle with the urge to hurt myself sometimes. And anxiety drives a lot of my life. As one of my friends said earlier today, the thought of suicide is still a tool, but I have better ones than that. And I'd rather use those.
I know my mind and my body better with every passing year. I really like my gray hair because I feel smarter. And I have a community and I have people to turn to. Finally found a team of professionals who are amazing. They help me, they respect me. They respect my expertise, they're very collaborative. They're fine with my history, my needs, my boundaries. And I know this isn't the answer for everyone. I was resistant to medications for a long time, but I finally found something that works for me. So even when it hurts so much that I think death is the only solution for me, even when I think I'm useless and burdensome and terrible, I know better intellectually. And I feel my feelings and I wait it out and I talk to my wife or my friends or my dog or my therapist. No wait, dogs. The dogs. I talk to those guys. So that's Dolly Parton on the left and Carolita on the right. They look really ridiculous together. One's very large, one's very small. Eventually, I can do those things and it's okay again. So if I could go back and I could talk to the girl who struggled for all those years and who tried to end their life and who found enough hope, just a little bit, that one day to run off the porch in Tennessee and into the unknown. If I could tell her all she'd come to see and feel and accomplish, she would not believe me. And sometimes I don't believe it either, but I'm really glad I'm still here. Thank you for listening to me.